Hello ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to start our work on Unit 2. We're going to take a look at solving quadratic equations, and then we're going to take a look at solving quadratic equations Part 2. So Lesson 1, some of you were writing a test today, some of you were away today, some of you were doing different things today, so this will give you an opportunity to get caught up before you come into class tomorrow. So let's see what we have on. Lesson 1. The roots of a quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c can sometimes be found by factoring and solving for the variable in each factor. The roots of a quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 can always be found using the quadratic formula. So sometimes we can do it by factoring, but all the time we can use the quadratic formula. A quadratic must be expressed in standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 before we can either factor or using the quadratic formula. So we're going to have to put it in standard form before we can do anything with it. The quadratic formula sometimes leads to negatives under the square root sign. When this happens, the quadratic is said to have no real roots. When I say real, I mean real number system. But we say if there's a negative under the square root that it has two imaginary roots, and that means that they're from the complex number system. Okay, so example 1 says solve by factoring. Let's get going. What we're going to do is look for two numbers that multiply to give 15, add to give 2, x plus 5, and x minus 3. Check it, x times x is x squared, minus 3, plus 5 is plus 2, and then minus 15. So when you have that, when you have two things that multiply to give 0, either the first one must be 0 or the second one must be 0. So either x plus 5 equals 0, in which case x equals negative 5, or x minus 3 equals 0, in which case x equals 3. The roots of this equation are x equals negative 5 and x equals 3. In other words, if I take negative 5 and plug them up here, I'll get 25 minus 10 minus 15, 0. If I take 3 and plug it up here, I'll get 9 plus 6, 15, subtract 15, 0. Those are the values that'll make this equation true. They are the roots. Looking over here. Well, it's not in standard form. We have to put it in standard form first, which will be 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 equals 0. So I moved everything over to that side of the equal sign. Then we're going to factor. I'm going to get a piece of paper and just do my rough work. So I'm looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to give 6, add to give 7. They multiply to give a positive. They add to give a negative. So I'm thinking that my answers are x minus 3, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. Let's check. X times 2x is 2x squared. That's going to be negative x. Take away 6x is negative 7x. It works. So if these two things are going to multiply to give 0, either the first one is 0 or the second one is 0. And those are your roots. Again, if I was to take those values and plug them in back up here, it would equal 0. Or if I was to take these values and plug them back up here, what you'd really get is left-hand side equals right-hand side. So this would be 3 squared is 9, times 2 is 18. 3 times 7 is 21, minus 3 is 18. So you'd actually get left-hand side equals right-hand side. Okay, this isn't a trinomial, so I'm not going to try to factor it as a trinomial. I'm going to put it in standard form. This is standard form. Now remember, standard form looks like this. I'm looking for my pen. Standard form is going to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The only difference is this c value is 0. So it's 7x squared plus 14x plus 0 equals 0. And so there is no c value. It's 0, so I don't need to write it. So we're going to factor. I'm going to factor this, common factor. Take out a 7x. I've got two things that multiply to give 0, so either the first one is 0. 0 divided by 7 is simply 0. Or x plus 2 equals 0. The sun's coming in. I think I'm going to close the blind so that we can see a little bit better. There we go. All right, here's the next one. So this is not in standard form. We can move some things around if we want to start off. We could try making it 2a plus 5 over 2 minus 3 over a equals 0. Looking at this, we could go for a common denominator. I have something new I'd like to share with you. It's called clearing the fractions. And the way that it works is that you multiply each term by the lowest common denominator. Now in this case, the lowest common denominator is 2a. So I'm going to multiply this term, and this term all by 2a. Let's see what we get. So it's going to be 2a times 2a. So this 2a gets multiplied by 2a. Plus 5 over 2 multiplied by 2a. Minus 3 over a multiplied by 2a. Equals 0. And again multiplied by 2a. So what I've effectively done is multiplied each and every term by 2a. So I've effectively multiplied both sides of the equation by 2a. Look what happens when I do this. See this 2a is actually over top of 1. We can reduce. See, this is over top of 1. This a and this a will reduce. What that leaves us with is a nicer equation. It's going to be 4a squared plus 5a minus 6 equals 0, because 0 times 2a is 0. That gives me a much nicer equation to solve than this one. So now I'm looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to give 24. So 4a, I'm doing my rough work. Two numbers to multiply to give 24 and add to give 5. I think it's going to be 8 and 3. So, and they multiply to give a negative, and they add to give a positive. So it's going to be, I believe my answers will be a plus 2 and 4a minus 3. I did my factoring on a scrap piece of paper. Let's check it. A times 4a is 4a squared. Minus 3a plus 8a will be 5a. Minus 6, it does work. So now we have either a plus 2 equals 0, in which case a equals minus 2, or a equals 3 over 4, which comes from this equaling 0. And those are my two roots. What I wouldn't mind showing you, if you don't mind, we have a moment, I'm going to show you another way to do that question. Let's say we were to take that question back to here. And let's say you went and got a common denominator. So you didn't clear the fractions, you got a common denominator. So we're going to multiply everything by whatever it takes to get the common denominator of 2a. So this 2a has a 1 in the denominator, so it has to be multiplied by 2a. This 2 is missing the a, so the 5 has to be multiplied by a. This a is missing the 2, so the 3 has to be multiplied by 2. And since I'm getting a common denominator, I don't do anything on the other side. It stays equal to 0. What that gives me is 4a squared plus 5a minus 6 over 2a equals 0. Now that's interesting. Now if I go to solve that, there's a couple of different ways I can think about this. I can either put it over top of 1 and cross multiply, and you'll notice that we end up with this, which is what I had before when I cleared the fractions. And then we just solve it. The other way to do that is to look at this and say to yourself, well, the only way I'm going to get 0 is if the top is 0. It doesn't matter what the bottom is. The bottom can be any number at all as long as it's not 0, okay? Because I can't be dividing by 0. But the only way I'm going to get 0 on top is if this equals 0. So you could jump right to saying, well, the bottom doesn't matter as long as a does not equal 0. We know that the only way I'm going to get 0 here is to make 4a squared plus 5a minus 6 equal to 0. And then you would solve that. So there's another way to handle this if you'd like. I suggest clearing the fractions. It makes your life a little bit easier. Okay, let's take a look at example 2. Now example 2 is asking you to use the quadratic formula. So a little bit different. So the first thing you have to do before you can use the quadratic formula or solve by factoring is you must rearrange into standard form. And standard form is ax squared, plus bx plus c equals 0. So this one is going to become m squared minus 2m minus 4 equals 0. The quadratic formula is x equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over top of 2a. And in this case, a equals 1, b equals negative 2, c equals negative 4. So put in what you've got. Now I've got b is negative 2. So a negative 2 is going to give me a positive 2. b is negative 2, so it's going to be negative 2 squared, which is 4, minus 4 times 1 times negative 4 over top of 2 times 1, which is 2. And the variable is m, so it's m equals. So it's going to be m equals 2 plus or minus square root 4 plus 16 over top of 2, which is going to be 2 plus or minus square root 20 over 2, which is going to be 2 plus or minus 2 root 5 over 2. We're going to common factor out of 2 here. 1 plus root 5 over 2. These are going to reduce, leaving us with 1 plus or minus root 5. Oh, we ran off the page, I'm sorry. Here you go. So I think I lost you around here. Root 20. Root 20 changes to 5 times 4. 4 is the perfect square, comes out as a 2. Common factor to 2 out of these two guys. Here it is here, so it becomes 1 plus or minus root 5 over 2. They reduce and gives us 1 plus or minus root 5. That is the root. If I was to take this value and plug it back into here, I would get 0. Okay, the last one on this sheet. I'm just going to draw a straight line down here so I don't get things confused with each other. Looking at this one. Now this one takes a little bit of space because there's a lot going on here. But it's going to be x equals minus b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over top of 2a, where a equals 3, b equals 2, and c equals 6. No biggie. So it's going to be x equals minus 2 plus or minus square root 4. Now 4 times 3 is 12 times 6 is 72 over top of 6. This is going to be minus 2 plus or minus square root negative 68 over 6. 68 is 17 times 4. So this will be a 4 times a 17 times a negative 1. So it's going to be negative 2 plus or minus 2i root 17 over 6. Common factor out of 2. Minus 2 bracket. Actually, I think I'll just take out the 2. So it'll be minus 1 plus or minus I root 17 over top of 6. And I need to get rid of that extra negative that I took out. So we'll get rid of it here. Come on, this should be working. And, well, there's more than one way to do this. There it is, gone. All right, so now that's gone. And so it's a 2 coming out, so these two will reduce. I'll get 1, 2, and a 3. Minus 1 plus or minus I root 17 is your final answer. Oh, over 3. Now, please be aware that there's two answers for x here. This is one of them. And this is the other. One of them has a positive. One of them has the negative. So there's two answers there. Don't worry about this down here. Your homework that I'd like you to take a look at is the next 3 pages. This just tells you how to do the question, just like I was doing, so give that a read. And I think it might be good for us to do the left-hand side of this sheet. And just these ones, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17. And here's some answers here that are pretty hard to read, but do your best and ask me in class. Okay guys, that's lesson 1.